The NFL season has come to a close. That Detroit Lions-Minnesota Vikings game was very telling to me, but we'll talk about all 32 teams, if the season was a success or a failure, at least in terms of the regular season, obviously for the 14 postseason teams. And let me do the math right there. 14, oh, that's 18. 14 postseason teams. They have a shot to go to the Super Bowl. So it's going to be on them to win it all in order for this season to be either a success or failure. But I'm going to talk about, at least in terms of the regular season, if it's been a success for all 32 teams. Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Welcome to the show. Welcome to today's edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. As always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and check the show out on social media. You can follow me on X at Hoty Andrew. You can follow the show on Facebook at Hoty Raw Takes. Well, excuse me, that's my Instagram username. You can follow the show at Instagram at Hoty Raw Takes. And then on Facebook, Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Just got to look that up in the search bar. Welcome to the show, everyone. Hope you had a wonderful weekend going in. It's now Tuesday, of course. So let's talk a little bit about all 32 NFL teams. I'm going to go over some of the coaches that have been fired, where they go from here, moves that may need to be made if the team did not make the postseason, or the teams that did make the postseason, why it was a success, and can they make a deep run once they get there. So let's start things off with the AFC, then we'll go over to the NFC. Buffalo Bills will start things off, the division winners. Clearly a huge successful year for them. They beat Kansas City once again in the regular season. Are there some concerns with the Buffalo Bills? I'd say there is a few, especially defensively. The Rams game in particular was a little concerning because they let the Rams take over and win that game. The Detroit Lions game, they did end up winning, but they kept it pretty close, and Detroit was hanging in there on offense the whole time. So I'm kind of concerned about Buffalo defensively. They let the Baltimore Ravens walk all over them at the beginning of the season, and I know there's a lot of talk that first week game, or the second or third, I believe it was the third week they played them. Those are like the preseason style games. Maybe it was week 4. I think they were 3-0, and then they played the Ravens. About that, no. It's not the preseason. That game counts. And then the Buffalo Bills didn't clinch the win over the Jets to get the 2 seed. There was a possibility that the Ravens could have been the 2 seed if they would have won, and the Buffalo Bills would have lost their last 2 games against both New York and New England. But that didn't happen. Buffalo's still in really good contention. Do I expect them to go on a run? I think they are going to end up making the AFC Championship. However, I still see them losing to Kansas City. The Chiefs just own them in the postseason, and until I see the Buffalo Bills beat the Chiefs, I would pick Kansas City to win that game every time. I still have Kansas City as my favorite to win the Super Bowl. There's no doubt about that. The Miami Dolphins finished second in the division. This season was an utter failure for them. Owner Stephen Ross of the Dolphins said that he is not firing Chris Grier, the GM, or Mike McDaniel, the head coach. I think a lot of the fans aren't aligned on Chris Grier because he's been there since 2016, and he really hasn't had any kind of postseason success. I believe there's only a total of 3 or 4 postseason appearances for the Dolphins. They have quite a few winning records, though, despite that low total of playoff appearances. I believe they have a winning season in 2020 that they went 10-6, but they didn't make the playoffs. Brian Flores, when he got fired, that was questionable. He's now the Vikings D coordinator. Adam Gase, I don't think there was any doubt when he got fired he had to go, but now you have Mike McDaniel here. And Mike McDaniel, out of those 3, is the winningest coach. He did have a losing record this year, though. A lot of injuries kind of got into that with the Dolphins. I still am not so sure I'm high on Tua Tagovailoa as a consistent starter that can compete with the Mahomes and the Allens of the league. I mean, he struggles against Josh Allen a lot of times they play each other. We have yet to see Miami really cross over the hump over the Buffalo Bills, so I'm not even willing to say I would take Miami to do that. Tyreek Hill saying allegedly he wanted out of Miami at the end of that game. I forgot the exact quote, so I want to be careful how I say that. And then Mike McDaniel saying he hasn't spoke about that. That could be a huge problem for the Dolphins if they move off of Tyreek Hill. They have Jalen Waddle, who's a great wide receiver, but he's not Tyreek Hill. So when I look at the Miami Dolphins right now, this season was a failure. Didn't get back to the postseason. Didn't win the division. Obviously, they have a long way to go. They got to retool a little bit. I think, personally, Mike McDaniel is a really good NFL head coach. I don't know how long he'll last with the Miami Dolphins. I don't know if it's going to be on an upward trajectory for them. They're paying Tua a lot of money now. And this roster, I still think overall is actually really good. I think if injuries didn't happen, we could have seen this roster at about 10-7. I really think they struggle against those really good teams. They haven't crossed the hump when it comes to playing teams above 500. They proved it last year. They're going to have to do it again next year to try to break through. I still think Mike McDaniel's a really good offensive mind, and I think they could possibly break through. But right now, the Dolphins have the longest playoff drought in terms of playoff wins in the NFL. Haven't won a playoff game since 2000. Every other team has, because Detroit won their playoff games last year. So that's going to be where the Miami Dolphins stand. They could have a bright future if they retool. But I think the draft is going to be really important for them, and I think free agency is also going to be a key. But Chris Grier has shown he knows how to draft. I will give him that. I know a lot of Dolphin fans aren't happy that Chris Grier is coming back next year. I think they're fine with McDaniel from what I've been reading. And as someone who has the Dolphins as their second team, I'll say this. I'm kind of on the fence with both. But Chris Grier, I think, drafts really, really well. The Tua Tagovailoa pick, I think, was the biggest question mark so far. But other than that, I think the Dolphins are going to figure things out a little bit. But having said that, I think it's a tough situation either way, especially when you play in a division with the Buffalo Bills. Taking a look at the New York Jets, a massive failure of his season. Aaron Rodgers was healthy throughout the entire year, and you did even worse this year than you did last year and the year before that, with Aaron Rodgers healthy. Aaron Rodgers, I don't know what else there is to say about him besides he's had a great career. I've always respected Aaron Rodgers, the football player. I think he's one of the best talents we've ever seen play quarterback. I did watch his Netflix series the other day, and definitely a strange guy. I mean, I not expect a lot of that stuff to come out from Aaron Rodgers, so I'm just going to point that out there with all due respect to Aaron Rodgers, the football player. But that has nothing to do with how the New York Jets season went. It was a disaster all around. I don't think Jet fans will be happy if Aaron Rodgers doesn't retire. I think they're in the market for a quarterback. I think there's a lot of flaws with the New York Jets offensively either. I'm not so sure Robert Saleh was the guy to go because the Jets defense really declined after he was fired. You have guys on that defense like Sauce Gardner, for example, who could really shut down other wide receivers in this league. He could play really, really well. But, having said that, though, you fire Robert Saleh, defensive-minded guy, and the season even went further south. So I'm not so sure Saleh was ever the problem. I think there was rumors that Aaron Rodgers was really running this show, and damn it, he might have been. But I don't know. The Jets season was really odd. It was 5-12. It was a disaster in a lot of ways. Aaron Rodgers gets that last win in that 500 touchdown pass. Will we see Aaron Rodgers play football again? I think it's possible. I do also think it's very possible this is his retirement season. And if he does, he had one heck of a career with a Super Bowl and a bunch of MVP seasons. But having said that, I don't see him returning to the New York Jets, even if he does play football again. I think the Jets are going to be in the quarterback market. I think their best bet is to wait and draft someone, but even with this draft class, I don't know if the Jets are going to be able to do that. A lot of holes on that roster. They're kind of a mess. And then the New England Patriots round up the bottom of the AFC East. A massive failure of a season, of course. I think everyone expected it to be. But I was really stunned and surprised that Gerard Mayo got fired after 1 year. I mean, Robert Kraft, that's some Daniel Snyder, Jimmy Haslam kind of behavior right there, where you're one and done in coaches. I mean, what's that all about? That's interesting to me. That's not the Patriot way, and I get it. Bill Belichick's not there. So what is the Patriot way nowadays? But I think we all know Robert Kraft and recognize Robert Kraft, despite some of his controversies, to be one of the best owners in the NFL. To be relatively patient, to be a guy who knows how football operates and runs, and obviously Bill Belichick being gone, it's going to change things a little bit. Gerard Mayo, I think, was in a tough situation. Robert Kraft even said he was in a really tough situation, and it was a mistake to put him in that position. Then why'd you do it in the first place, A? And B, why do you fire a guy after you just draft a rookie quarterback? You got to give him time to work with Drake May and figure things out. New England Patriots are in really bad shape anyway. But having said that, I question Robert Kraft completely on this decision. As I said, I view him to be one of the best owners in the NFL. The Patriots, obviously, I think if they're in a little bit of a slump for a while, that's fine. Their fans are coming off 2 decades of success. I think they're going to be fine long term. They have the Celtics in Boston. They'll be fine. So I think it's definitely some interesting decisions made by the New England Patriots, especially from Robert Kraft and his comments on Gerard Mayo. I would have kept him another year to let him figure things out with Drake May. And if you didn't see the team ascend, I would have probably fired him then. I think patience with Gerard Mayo would have been a big thing. But obviously, the New England Patriots were a disaster this year. Drake May does have some potential, though. The New England Patriots played the Buffalo Bills in the first matchup really well. Obviously, in the second, it didn't go so well for the Bills. But the Bills already locked up the playoff seeding, so I think that was an interesting win by New England, and I think and they beat Cincinnati at the beginning of the year too. Cincinnati missed the playoffs, but still finished 9-8. So you know what? The New England Patriots maybe can hang their hat on that. But obviously, a disaster of a season. They have a lot of work to do. AFC North. All right, you know how familiar I am with the AFC North. The Baltimore Ravens ended up winning the division, back-to-back titles for them. Obviously, an electric year for Lamar Jackson yet again. Derrick Henry adding to the running game. Baltimore Ravens are going to be a tough out in a playoff game. I wouldn't want to see them. If I'm Pittsburgh going into this weekend, I'm shaking. I really, really am. Especially because Pittsburgh's coming off a little bit of a late season collapse. But we know how physical that Ravens-Steelers rivalry can get. I think when you look at the Baltimore Ravens as a team, they're pretty complete offensively. Their defense is concerning. The Steeler offense hasn't been very impressive towards the end of the season. I think there's going to be question marks about how Arthur Smith is running things. But obviously, I don't think the quarterback situation in Pittsburgh is really 100% figured out yet. Is it going to be Russell Wilson? Do they still believe in Justin Fields? I don't know. But having said that, I look at what the Baltimore Ravens have brought to the table offensively, and I'll tell you what, they're a juggernaut. And it's going to be really tough to stop them. Pittsburgh's defense, pretty good, can get physical. They won that game in Pittsburgh. On all field goals against Baltimore. That's just how this rivalry goes every once in a while. So I'm excited, I guess, in a degree to see how these teams rematch again for a third time, even though I despise both of them as a Browns fan. But the Baltimore Ravens, as an offense, are a juggernaut. John Harbaugh, very much experienced, knows what he's doing, has won playoff games in recent years. Lamar Jackson has 2 playoff wins. I know a lot of people criticize his playoff record because he hasn't beaten Mahomes in the postseason and he hasn't beaten Josh Allen in the postseason and stuff like that. I think the Baltimore Ravens have a legit chance against the Buffalo Bills if they end up meeting them in the second round. But we'll see. I like the Baltimore Ravens going into the postseason to play the Pittsburgh Steelers to win that game. But as in terms of a regular season, yeah, it was pretty successful. They had some weird dud games in there, like that loss to the Cleveland Browns. Probably shouldn't have happened, but it was a new offensive play caller and a quarterback that hasn't played in a Browns uniform in Jameis Winston. And games like that can be weird in the NFL. So Baltimore did have some thud games like that. There's 2 games against Cincinnati they probably shouldn't have won, but they did. And because they did beat them, Cincinnati is not in the playoffs, and they are. It could have been actually, in some ways, flipped to where they're the 7th-seeded wild card if Cincinnati would have won those 2 games. But nevertheless, that didn't happen. So that's where the Baltimore Ravens are. They had some thud games in there, but overall they're a pretty solid team, and they're offensively a juggernaut. They really, really are. But their defense is concerning. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I think their offense kind of fell apart at the end of the year. That loss to Cincinnati was kind of inexcusable. You look at some of the games that happened down the stretch. That loss to Cleveland in the snow, also kind of one of those weird games. How do you lose to the Browns like that? But they did, and divisional football is weird either way. But they came back and hammered the Browns in Pittsburgh like they always do anyway. The Steelers, do I think they're going to win a playoff game this year? I would have said yes if they would have got the Houston Texans. They ended up getting the Baltimore Ravens, so I don't think that's happening. The Baltimore Ravens have been kind of owned by the Pittsburgh Steelers in recent years, and I think they know that. And I think this game means not a lot to them just because it's the postseason, but because it's the Pittsburgh Steelers, and because of that rivalry, and because how well these 2 teams and franchises know each other, I think the Baltimore Ravens are going to pound the Pittsburgh Steelers pretty hard in terms of that. I think it'll still be a close game, but this is going to be some physical AFC North football. So, I mean, the Steelers, though, in terms of their regular season, overall, they figured some things out. They still have a lot of talented players. You look at Cam Hayward, you look at TJ Watt leading the defense, you look at a guy like Joey Porter Jr., who has a lot of potential. I despise the Steelers, so it's tough to give them credit. But, George Pickens, I still think is a locker room problem. But at the end of the day, when he delivers, he can deliver. If Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, I mean, Russell Wilson's going to start, but like if one of the 2 of them could get the football in the hands of George Pickens, good things will tend to happen. So we'll see what takes place with that AFC North playoff game. I think those are 2 very physical teams there. But the big question mark, I think, is Mike Tomlin. And I don't think he's on the hot seat at all. He got extended, and we know how Pittsburgh operates. And I think it'd be ridiculous for him to be on the hot seat because he's never had a losing season. But you look at that playoff record since 2016, and you see loss, essentially. So, the pressure's probably building upon Mike Tomlin to win a playoff game. And he has a losing record in the playoffs now. So, if I'm Mike Tomlin, I would think, even though my job is safe, I am looking at winning this game because it'll put all that aside. If you win this game in the playoffs, I think a lot of Steeler fans are going to start to quiet down a little bit. And I think Steeler fans should respect Mike Tomlin a lot more than they do because he has never had a losing season. And us in Cleveland, we would be thrilled to have something like that, but we don't. We don't. But Kevin Stefanski also had, I mean, it was the COVID year, but he has a playoff win more recently than Mike Tomlin. So it doesn't mean he's a better coach than Tomlin. I don't think he is. But having said that, I think Tomlin is a little bit on a clock in terms of the postseason wins and how many can you lose more before it really starts to hit home with top management in Pittsburgh. I doubt they would fire Mike Tomlin, but, there might come a point where these playoff losses build and build and build, and it gets to a point where Mike Tomlin won't be the coach of the Steelers maybe sometime down the line. I think that would be a few years away, though. The Steelers know what they're doing. They're a well-run organization. Having said that, though, I think it's crucial for Mike Tomlin in the long run to win this playoff game, at the very least. He doesn't have to go to the Super Bowl, just win this playoff game. Let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. A nice way to end the season, but a massive failure all around. You have a guy who's leading the league in passing yards. You have one of the best wide receivers in football, probably two of the best wide receivers in football when you look at T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Joe Burrow's, I think, the second best quarterback in the AFC. I even put him above Josh Allen because he's been to a Super Bowl. Didn't win it, but has been there. And has never lost to Josh Allen, by the way. So I think Joe Burrow is the second best quarterback in the AFC, but you're wasting him. And the Cincinnati Bengals defense was awful. They obviously made some coaching adjustments in terms of their defense. Zach Taylor, he did end the season nicely, and the Bengals are above 500 yet again, so it'd be hard-pressed for me to say he's got to go. But, the Bengals need some big changes, and defense has to be their focus. The offensive line has always been a question mark going in with Cincinnati. I think they're starting to somewhat build upon their offensive line. It's not nearly as bad as it was in 2021 and 22. But that's going to be a problem. You're going to get Joe Burrow beat up back there, and I still think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the game, probably second to Mahomes, as long as the Bengals could field a team around Joe Burrow. They do it offensively in terms of weapons and usually in the running game, but there is some holes to fill on that defense. They need a pass rush. They need some safeties and corners because the passing defense, especially that one Pittsburgh game where Russell Wilson just went off, probably Russell Wilson's best game in a Steeler uniform. I think if you are the Cincinnati Bengals, defense is going to be your number one focus this offseason. And you're going to have to build it upon it in the draft. I think you could find some guys in free agency and try to find a defensive coordinator that's a veteran. Not obviously Jim Schwartz is here, but try to find someone like a Jim Schwartz out there. A good, hard-hitting defensive coordinator that can build upon a defense and get Joe Burrow essentially more time to score and score. Because at the end of the day, we talk so much about how the quarterback's the most important position in football. And it is. It is the most important position in football. But when you look at what the Cincinnati Bengals are doing in every one of their games, the quarterback's showing up and playing every week. Their defense is non-existent. And you could ask quarterbacks to score up to 28, 35 points a game, sometimes 40, and lose. Joe Burrow, I think, lost with 38 points in a game, 35 points in a game. 27, large offensive production, and you're letting teams score way more than that. That's a defensive issue. That's not an offensive issue. Cincinnati's got to go the defensive route this offseason. We'll see if they do. Last but not least, of course, the Cleveland Browns, an utter failure this year. I can't even express how much of a failure it is. We all know my thoughts on that. I want to know your thoughts as well. Please leave me your raw takes in the comments. But, please, with the Cleveland Browns. This season was awful. Obviously, Kevin Stefanski's coming back. Andrew Berry's coming back. Probably the right decision in terms of what they've been able to do during their run here. But when you look at this Cleveland Browns season and what's been going on with Deshaun Watson and the failure that trade has essentially been, I'm marking it as a failure at this point. He stinks. He's awful. And he's in Miami vacationing when the Cleveland Browns are in the middle of an epic collapse. And now, as I mentioned before, 6 alternates and 3 Pro Bowlers. How are you missing the playoffs? How are you 3-14? You clearly have talent on this roster outside of the quarterback position. And there's a lot of mock drafts going out there right now. We'll get into mock drafts later. I don't have mine particularly designed or thought out yet. But I don't want to see Shedeur Sanders in a Cleveland Browns uniform. I'm sorry. That guy's all hype to me. That's all hype to me. Colorado played nobody tough in the college football. I almost said playoffs there. That's tomorrow. But in college football. He didn't play anybody tough, and Colorado should have never been ranked. And, I can go on and on about my thoughts about that. And I want to give the Colorado program credit led by Deion Sanders because they were nothing a few years ago, and they got 8 wins this year. So good for them, or 9 wins. They did really well, Colorado did, compared to where they were a few years ago. So it's great improvement in their program. It's a great story, but they are not a ranked team yet. And Shedeur Sanders, I don't think is the guy. I think he's all hype. Cam Ward, I do think is the guy, but I think he's going to go to the Tennessee Titans at this point. But having said that, I think if you're the Browns, you might consider going the free agent route for a quarterback because you only have so much money to field for a team in general. And getting a young guy right now, I don't necessarily know is the best option. You might want to get a Kirk Cousins or a Derek Carr. Get somebody in here for a year or 2. I'd say 2 years because if you draft a quarterback next year, let him develop. And then you just sit Deshaun Watson, have alleged QB competition, but you can't cut him because then you can't field a team. The Browns are a mess. Now, they made some good steps in terms of this. Ken Dorsey, fired, done, out of here. And I think that's the right call. Ken Dorsey cannot be the offensive coordinator, probably for any team in the NFL again. We saw what happened with the Buffalo Bills, and now we just saw what happened with the Cleveland Browns. Ken Dorsey's probably done being an offensive coordinator for a while in this league. Obviously, Andy Dickerson getting fired as the offensive line coach. Obviously, there's been some offensive line issues. I think some of them is coaching. I think the intangibles for a lot of the offensive linemen outside of Jedrick Wills Jr. are there, but who knows if Joel Bitonio will be back next year. Rumors he could retire, he may not. We don't really have an answer on that. We'll see. But other than that, the offensive line is, I think, a lot better than people anticipate. And there needs to be better coaching for that. And Andy Dickerson was not the guy, so I think that move had to be made too. And you can't fault Bill Callahan for wanting to go coach with his son. So having said that, those moves needed to be made. Will there be more coming? We'll have to see. Bubba Ventrone, is he on the hot seat after Dustin Hopkins was essentially a mess this year? But Corey Bojorquez had a really good year. I don't know if Bubba Ventrone should be on the hot seat because of that either. So obviously, we'll find out more moves the Browns make within due time. But the Browns season, an utter failure. I think everyone knows that. And they're drafting number 2 overall in the 2025 NFL draft. And who would have thought that this would be the situation? A lot of us thought even if Deshaun Watson was bad this year, this wouldn't be a 3-14 football team. It'd probably be a 6-11, 7-10. This is an utter disaster. And you just extended Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry from last year. And then this happens. It's a sad situation, and the Cleveland Browns are going to have to eat up that contract possibly for years to come. But I say fear not. This is still a really talented team. The Pro Bowl list and the alternate list should prove that for you. It's just, can they get a good quarterback in to at least get you the talent already out there to the playoffs? You have Jerry Jeudy. You have Myles Garrett. You have Joel Bitonio. You have David Njoku. You have all these guys. You have JOK when he's healthy again. You have all these guys. You could do something with this team if you get good quarterback play out of them. AFC South, and we'll start off with the Houston Texans. Kind of a late season collapse. They did have some easy games they won later on. That Baltimore game was kind of a disaster for them, though. So I think the Houston Texans are kind of coming down to earth a little bit from what we saw last year. No, I don't see them winning a playoff game. I think the Chargers are going to smoke them. And because of that, I think the Houston Texans kind of have a down year next year. I still think DeMeco Ryans has got a lot of potential to be a really good head coach, and clearly his record indicates that's the case. He is now overall, I believe, 20-14 in the regular season. So DeMeco Ryans has it in him to be really good, and I still believe in him, and I still think Houston's defense within time will be better. C.J. Stroud, I think, is the real deal and is going to be a consistent quarterback year in and year out. But to me, the Houston Texans are just kind of in a crappy division. Kind of got lucky with that. I still think they're developing a few things that within time will be a lot better. But it wouldn't surprise me if the Texans have a down year next year. And the Jacksonville Jaguars, once they figure out who their new head coach is, they start to kind of figure things back up with Trevor Lawrence, and that becomes a much more competitive division. I might be wrong on that, but I don't see the Houston Texans winning a playoff game. And if they do beat the Los Angeles Chargers, I'll honestly be stunned. But overall, they matched the record from last year. I think we know what Houston is. I think they could build upon this. I think within time, though, we're going to start to see that. I don't think it's going to be a next year to another year thing. I don't see them winning a playoff game this year. There's just something about them that's weird. They have talent on the roster, but they just don't feel complete yet. I still think they have some decisions to make. Taking a look next at the Indianapolis Colts, big failure this season. Anthony Richardson, I don't think is the guy. There's obviously some controversies. I talked about how the Colts should have cut him after he pulled himself out of the game because he wanted to rest. I thought that was kind of crappy. That loss to the Giants was kind of ugly on the Colts' behalf, but you know what? They're just not a good football team. I think Shane Steichen's a really good coach, but they have a lot of things to adjust, and it's going to take some time. And I think the Colts, maybe down the line, they still have Jonathan Taylor running the football, but even he had some really stupid decisions that he made this year on the field. So, I mean, the Colts are kind of just a dumb team. They really make some really stupid decisions on the field. A lot of the players do, and I think that's coaching to some degree, but I still think Shane Steichen, he made a team that everyone thought was going to be awful last year, 9-8. So they're in the middle of the pack. The Colts, I think, still have some potential. I'm not so sure Anthony Richardson is going to be their long-term answer, though. They might be back in the quarterback market soon. You look at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Their season was obviously an utter failure. Trevor Lawrence getting hurt, obviously, at the end really just made it go off the rails even more. But having said that, you look at Trevor Lawrence's numbers overall to start the year in particular. I don't really think Trevor Lawrence is at fault for this season being as bad as it was. I just think the Jaguars were very poorly coached by Doug Peterson. I think Doug Peterson has proven to be a little bit exposed as the Jaguars head coach because he had that system that worked in Philly, but he only has one double-digit winning season, and it was the year the Eagles won the Super Bowl. Other than that, his highest win count was 9, even though he won some playoff games during that stretch. He's only won 9 games as his highest win total any other season. And because the Jaguars were so bad this year, it ended up costing Doug Peterson his job. And I think when you look at the Jacksonville Jaguars, they have some interesting coaching candidates out there. Robert Saleh, I think, is someone to look at as well. I think they need help defensively. I would look at Robert Saleh. I know he's a name they requested to interview too. So we'll see what happens with the Jacksonville Jaguars there. But I think overall, obviously a mess of a season. I think Doug Peterson should have been fired weeks ago. I think they made the move at the wrong time, but they were out of the playoff race essentially, so probably not best to pull the trigger on firing a head coach when you could just do it down the line. So having said that, yeah, the Jacksonville Jaguars, mess of a season, but I think they could rebound and be a lot better. Once Trevor Lawrence is healthy, I still believe in him. I think he could figure it out. He's now been in the league 4 years. We've seen him win a playoff game before. The potential is there for Trevor Lawrence. I just think the Jacksonville Jaguars, as an organization, they tend to figure things out relatively quickly in terms of when things really do go south. They make those cuts and then bring new people in. They've done that every time. They did it when Doug Marrone went 1-15. Then they did it once Urban Meyer clearly was the problem. And then they did it with Doug Peterson essentially after a disastrous season. So I think the Jaguars, although historically over the years not have been great, they do tend to know when to pull the trigger on certain things. And I think this time they're making the right decision overall. The season was already a wash. But I still think Trevor Lawrence is really good and has the potential to be. I still think Travis Etienne is really good and has the potential to be. And you have Josh Allen on that defense too. Jaguars Josh Allen, not Bills Josh Allen. So, we'll have to see. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars actually may be in a better place, and I think it starts with firing Doug Peterson. I think that was absolutely the right move. And then the Tennessee Titans got the first overall pick in the draft. I don't think we can complain about as much as bad of a football team they were. But that's to be expected. I think there's no question they're going to go after Cam Ward most likely in the draft. Maybe Shedeur Sanders if this hype keeps going up, but I doubt it. I think Cam Ward is going to be their pick. I just say get ready to pack your bags, Cam, and go to Nashville and enjoy Music City. The Tennessee Titans had the first overall pick in the draft. I don't think there's much to say besides it was a failure, and we'll have to see what happens with Ryan Callahan as the head coach. Maybe he has some potential. The Titans are giving him another year, though, and I think that's absolutely deserved. He's a rookie head coach. He's just getting the swing of things here, and obviously there's a lot of room to grow if you are the Tennessee Titans in the future. Because you're already at the bottom. You can only go up from here. All right, let's look at the AFC West. Kansas City Chiefs, we already know what they are and what they bring to the table. An outstanding football team from top to bottom. Patrick Mahomes, we know what he can do. Travis Kelce, we know what he can do. We know what they have offensively. They have DeAndre Hopkins. What a move that was to go grab him. Kareem Hunt's now running the football. They won 15 games. I know that Denver Bronco game at the end of the season was a disaster, but Kansas City could have cared less. They have the number 1 seed. They're 2 wins away from the Super Bowl. I don't know what else there is to say about them besides they just play clutch football. And Andy Reid knows when to call the right plays. And the defense that they've put together is phenomenal. The Chiefs' defense is really good. It's the best defense that Patrick Mahomes has had in his career. And if they keep this up, Kansas City Chiefs may only get better from here. I could easily see them winning a 3rd Super Bowl in a row. And we're talking about the first three-peat in the NFL at the end of the season. Having said that, though, I want someone to beat the Chiefs. I would hope it's Buffalo. But if they meet up with Detroit in the Super Bowl and Detroit ends up winning, I'd love that too. I really, really would. I don't like the Chiefs overall. It's getting old. It's getting repetitive. And I kind of miss the Patriots dynasty at this point. And that's sad to say. I never would have thought I'd get there. But the Kansas City Chiefs, they're likable to not like, is really the truth. I like not liking them. It's fun to kind of root for them as the villain. And they're going to get the best A game from all the NFL, but at the end of the day, I still think teams are tightening up a little too much because they know what they're up against in Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Still a successful season for them, 15-2, number one seed overall. Moving on to the Chargers, you look at Jim Harbaugh and what he's been able to accomplish in his first year as the Chargers head coach. Justin Herbert, obviously, getting things going on the offense. You look at their defense for a while, one of the best defenses in the NFL, still have some top-tier talent on that lineup. You look at everything that the Chargers have brought to the table. They're a good football team. I think they're going to beat the Houston Texans. I don't think they're going to do that whole Jacksonville Jaguars, let's blow a 27-0 lead thing again. That was during the Brandon Staley era. I think during the Jim Harbaugh era, it's going to be a lot different. And this was the quarterback that Harbaugh wanted. This is Justin Herbert. It's his guy. And now he's not with Michigan. He's in the NFL. He's playing for a Super Bowl again. I think they go to Kansas City and lose after they beat the Houston Texans, but I like the Chargers' odds in the postseason. I would not want to see that defense in a playoff game. I think that defense is dangerous, and if I am the Houston Texans, I'm concerned. So that's my thoughts on the Los Angeles Chargers. Denver Broncos, I don't view them as a postseason threat, but this was a nice season for them. Bo Nix did some great things. I slept on Denver the whole year. I even said on my show off, and I'm not taking Denver seriously. Sean Payton is possibly a candidate for Coach of the Year this year. He did a lot to fix what happened with that Russell Wilson disaster, and now they're in the playoffs. I don't think the Broncos win a playoff game. I think they're going to lose to Buffalo, but I think they put up a fight. Broncos had a really good season overall. Their defense is really well, too. I mean, they put up 70 points to the Miami Dolphins. I mean, that defense has come a long way from where it was last year, and Vance Joseph is still there as the D coordinator, so props to him. And you look at guys like Surtain on the roster. I mean, Bo Nix has definitely got it to a degree. Him and Jaden Daniels, obviously rookie of the years, offensively most likely. I think Jaden Daniels is probably going to win it. But what the Denver Broncos did this year was pretty incredible. Didn't expect it. I think they are going to end their season against Buffalo this weekend, but it was an impressive run for them. On the Las Vegas Raiders, disaster all around, and today they fired Antonio Pierce. I think it's a mistake. I think when you look at the Raiders and what they've been able to do, they accomplished nothing. Mark Davis is not his dad. They've done really nothing. John Gruden probably overstayed his welcome to a degree, even though he was let go. Or I don't want to say let go. I think it was a departure for the controversy that took place with those emails, but it might have been a parting of the ways, or he resigned. It was something weird. But so I'm not going to get into that either. I just know that John Gruden, when he left, it was probably, though, overdue. He probably should have been gone before then. And then you look at Josh McDaniels coming in, and he's a mess. He should never be a head coach in the NFL again. That's just my opinion. I think he's a disaster everywhere he's gone. Everything he's touched goes down the tubes. And then Antonio Pierce comes in, and he gave the Raiders some life at the end of last season. And this year, the Raiders on paper were already teased to be terrible, so you got to let him build and let him get his quarterback and figure this out. I don't like that Antonio Pierce only got a year. I don't like coaches that are one and done either. I don't like that Gerard Mayo only got a year with New England. So Raiders, I think, are in a mess. I think they're always going to be a mess, and I think it goes to the top again. I just think Mark Davis is an awful owner. He really, really is. The NFC now. As I said for my playoff predictions, I'll give my full ones this upcoming weekend, and the next edition of Raw Takes will also reflect on those college football games that are going to be played upcoming, because there's some big ones. Ohio State playing Texas. It's getting down to the wire here with the last 4 teams left. But let's get to the NFC now, and I'll go over my last 32 predictions. Last 16, I should say. We're 16 teams away from concluding the show. Let's start things off in the NFC East with the Philadelphia Eagles. I think Saquon Barkley are the 2 words that define the season for them. He runs the football so efficiently. Jalen Hurts has been incredible overall. I really like what Jalen Hurts has been able to bring to the Eagles. He's fun to watch. He really is. As much as I don't like Eagle fans, I really love what the Eagles have been doing. I like Nick Sirianni as a head coach. I think if you're a Philadelphia fan and you wanted him out of town last year, that's ridiculous. All the guy does is win. He's never had a losing season yet, and he's, I think, 50, almost 50 and 20, I think, is his record as an NFL head coach. He's done tremendous stuff. I give Nick Sirianni a lot of credit. I think he's a damn good head coach. And, all the controversy that Nick Sirianni and Dan Campbell got when they were hired in the 2021 coaching cycle, look at them now. Both of them are incredible head coaches, and I think Nick Sirianni deserves a lot of credit for that. The defense that the Philadelphia Eagles have put together, pretty good. I wouldn't want to play the Philadelphia Eagles in a playoff game if I'm anybody. I really wouldn't. Green Bay is the unfortunate team that gets them first. And especially with the Jordan Love news coming down. There's also a question mark still about Jalen Hurts this weekend. But even then, with Saquon Barkley and how he runs the football, I wouldn't want to be the Green Bay Packers this weekend. I think Philadelphia is just going to roll right on to the NFC Championship. I don't see anybody that could stop them. I know Tampa Bay beat them earlier this year. And I think if any team in the NFC has the best chance to beat Philly, it's Tampa Bay because they already did it. But having said that, though, Philly's secondary is a lot better than it was last year. We know defense was kind of the problem at the end of last season with Matt Patricia being there. And obviously everything Matt Patricia touches now just goes down the tubes as well. So Philadelphia Eagles, though, I would not want to play them in a playoff game. So I wish anyone luck that gets to play the Philadelphia Eagles. The Washington Commanders, obviously a very successful season. A lot of the past, and obviously Daniel Snyder selling the team and all that. I think a lot of that's starting to slowly fade away now that you have Jaden Daniels as your quarterback, clearly a franchise guy, clearly changing the entire culture of the Commanders within 1 year. Dan Quinn was the right head coaching hire, defensive-minded guy when he was with the Falcons. He took them to a Super Bowl. Obviously, things went south once the defense went under for Atlanta. And then he started to become the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator and worked his way back up to another head coaching job. I like Dan Quinn a lot. I like what he brought to the Washington Commanders. I think their culture is really, really good. And I would expect the Commanders to be a team that fights Tampa Bay like mad. They might even win that game, honestly. I still like Tampa in that game, and it's not my Baker Mayfield bias, but it's just because I think Tampa's offense can be so explosive. But the Commanders, great season for them. And they're on a really good track. And I'd say if I'm in the NFC East next year, I want nothing to do with the Commanders. I think they have a good shot to win a division. And nobody in that division repeats as division champion. I don't think it's happened since like 2005 or 6 or something. It's been a long time. So the Commanders, a great successful season for them. And Jaden Daniels, oh boy, he is something special. I'll tell you that. Dallas Cowboys season was a failure. I think everyone knows that. At the beginning of the year, it looked like they could be really, really good. I also thought, though, the Cleveland Browns were going to be relatively watchable and not a disaster. I thought Deshaun Watson was going to light up the league, and I was very, very wrong, and I regret ever thinking that. And the Cleveland Browns were awful, so Dallas had every reason to destroy them because Dallas isn't awful, but they're not good. So, having said that, Mike McCarthy, I know the Bears requested to interview him, and the Cowboys declined, so it looks like they're going to keep Mike McCarthy. I'm at a point where I think Mike McCarthy getting fired might be deserved at a point because even when a lot of the Cowboys players were healthy, they were 3-7. They were a mess all year long. And Cooper Rush came in there and actually played okay for a little bit, but I think Cooper Rush has a high ceiling. Philadelphia really took it to him twice. I think it was the first year since 2011 the Eagles swept the Cowboys. So the Cowboys are kind of a mess right now. But I think when everybody gets healthy, it's a very talented roster, but they still have a ceiling. They're like the Miami Dolphins in the AFC. Like, the Dolphins and the Cowboys can never really beat elite competition, but they have so many good players on the roster. They're just not that good when it comes to playing better teams in the league. So, Dallas Cowboys have a lot of work to do. But I still think Mike McCarthy's a good head coach, but I think at this point, we know who Mike McCarthy is as a coach. It's just getting to the point where it's the same Mike McCarthy over and over again. I think that's why Green Bay fired him. And I think if Dallas doesn't win a Super Bowl or at least make the playoffs next year, it's why the Cowboys fire him. But having said that, he's probably staying another year. I would consider moving on from Mike McCarthy if I'm the Cowboys at this point. But it's also Jerry world. We know how Jerry operates. I personally do like Jerry Jones a lot. I'm not a huge fan of the Cowboys overall, but I do enjoy Jerry Jones. But I'm at a point now where the Cowboys are just still a laughingstock. Rounding up the bottom of the division, the New York Giants, they kind of blew their odds to get the number one seed in, well, not the number one seed, excuse me. They were not even close to that. The number one draft pick that Indianapolis would happen. I know some Giants fans aren't happy about it, but Ryan Dable staying another year. Mara already said he was going to do that. So I think it's a good thing that we look at Brian Dable and he's going to be the Giants head coach another year. I think because of his AP Coach of the Year status, he did a terrific job. Daniel Jones now being out of the building, I think, is going to benefit the Giants. A lot of work to do there, though, in New York. We'll have to see what takes place. But they are still a mess overall. Bad season for the Giants and a colossal failure, of course. The NFC North, obviously the Detroit Lions. What they do in the playoffs now is going to determine if their season was a success or a failure. They got to win it all now. And I really think this is their window because Minnesota is clearly good. I don't know how good Sam Darnold is depending on his game from Sunday, but we'll see what happens in the postseason. I'm not sold on Minnesota winning a playoff game. But having said that, the Detroit Lions had a really good year, 15-2, undefeated on the road, sweeping division opponents for the first time in franchise history, at least in the NFC North. It might only be in the modern era. But the Detroit Lions were such a bad organization for so long, you can't help but really root for them to try to win the whole damn thing now. And the Detroit Lions are so likable and they're so well coached, and Dan Campbell knows what he's doing. And I don't know anyone outside of Minneapolis, maybe Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. That was it. That was rooting for the Lions to lose that game. I really don't know anybody that would. And the Lions are just overall a really complete team. I mean, Aaron Glenn should be considered coach of the year, not head coach, but coach of the year for taking a beat-up Detroit Lions defense and making them look like the 85 Bears against Sam Darnold and the Vikings. He took it to them hard. So, seeing that how good Minnesota's offense is, if Aaron Glenn can take a defense that's already beat up and do that to anybody else in the NFC, that's kind of scary. I think Philadelphia is better than the Vikings, so I think if it's Philly, that's not going to be the same kind of thing, and I think Detroit-Philly is going to be your NFC championship. It's going to be interesting to see what takes place. I think the Detroit Lions are the favorites to get to the Super Bowl, but the way Philadelphia runs the football with Saquon Barkley, and granted, Montgomery's coming back, and Jahmyr Gibbs can run the football too, but the way that Saquon Barkley runs the football, it's going to be hard for anyone in Detroit's defense to stop that, and I think Detroit might struggle with that if they get to the NFC Championship and play them. If I'm Detroit, one team I want to avoid in the first round of the playoffs might be a Green Bay Packers. You play teams 3 times, it's just kind of concerning. I mean, Minnesota too, but Minnesota was pretty much pummeled in Detroit the other night, and I think they're going to lose to the Rams. So having said that, if I'm Detroit, I hope I get anybody but Green Bay in round 1 of their postseason. I don't think Green Bay is going to get out of that game with Philly anyway, but having said that, that's who I'd watch out for if I'm Detroit. I just don't like the odds of beating a team 3 times in a row, especially a team that cut it pretty close in Detroit, like not the Lions, but the Packers did when Jordan Love came out of that game. So, but there's still question marks about if Jordan Love's even going to play for Green Bay this upcoming weekend against Philly. So we'll see what happens there. But Detroit Lions, obviously a successful regular season. What they do in the postseason is going to be huge. But they're the number 1 seed overall, and if I'm anyone outside of maybe Philadelphia, I don't want to play them. The Minnesota Vikings, a very successful season for them. Even if they don't win a playoff game, this was a very successful season for them. Kevin O'Connell, Coach of the Year in my opinion, what he was able to do with the Vikings with Sam Darnold to win 14 games and not even be a division winner. Very impressive. I think he is a great head coach. Does Sam Darnold stay in Minnesota? It's possible, but I still think Sam Darnold is a guy where we know who he is. I think because of how well Minnesota's offense is put together, it really elevated Sam Darnold this year. Sam Darnold didn't have to do too much, but we saw him play the Rams and the Lions twice, and Sam Darnold folded a lot of the time. So kept the first Lions game close, but he didn't have that big elevated moment. We didn't see Minnesota play too much elite competition this year. They did pound the Texans, but I don't really view the Texans as elite competition right now. I think Minnesota is really just an okay team that happened to get a favorable schedule. And as I said, if I'm Minnesota, I don't want to see Detroit in round 2. I don't want to see the Rams in round 1. If I'm them, I would have wished that the matchup for them would have been Tampa Bay if they were going to win a game. But even then, I don't like them against Tampa Bay. I don't like Minnesota in a playoff game. But when you go 14-3, your head coach deserves a lot of credit. That offense is really good. I give the Minnesota Vikings credit. They're a fun watch. But in terms of playoff success, I just don't see it happening with them, especially because of what happened on Sunday against Detroit. The Green Bay Packers, definitely a successful season, but you look at that division record, it's 1-5. A regular season success, this is a 7 seed, probably would be better any other NFL year, but they're a 7 seed because the NFC had a lot of 10-win teams. So, yeah, Green Bay, good year. Jordan Love, I think, got better this year compared to where he was last year. He already has a playoff win under his belt. But it's going to take a while, I think, for Green Bay to really get back in the playoff conversation in terms of winning playoff games. I think they could next year if Detroit has like a Super Bowl hangover or, the roster just gets depleted or something like that. But, yeah, when I look at the Green Bay Packers right now, this was overall a good year for them. I don't expect them to do anything in the playoffs, though, and it's just because they get Philadelphia in the first round. If they would have had Tampa Bay, I would have said maybe. They would have had the Rams. I would have given them a shot. They beat the Rams earlier this year, too. I don't think the Green Bay Packers are going to be an impressive postseason team, and it's not their fault. I think they're a good football team. I just think they're in the wrong division at the wrong time and in the NFC playoffs at the wrong seed. If they were a 3 or 4 team who had home field advantage at Lambeau, I think it would be different for the Green Bay Packers, but that's not the case. The Chicago Bears, it's a failure. It's such a failure. They're a disaster. They're so fun to root against. And it's not for Bears fans. I feel awful for Bears fans. I'm a Browns fan. Trust me, I feel bad for you guys. But you know what? The Bears are so dislikable as an organization. I don't like Ryan Poles, the GM. I didn't like Matt Eberflus, head coach. I'm still on the whole they should have drafted Marvin Harrison bandwagon. Caleb Williams, I still don't buy. It's not all his fault. It isn't, but he's not likable at the same time. So for me, it's hard to root for the Bears at all. I predicted them to go 5-12 at the beginning of the year. I was right. They're awful. They got a lot of work to do. And I honestly say this. They obviously looked to try to get Mike McCarthy, and they declined it. If I'm the Bears, I want nothing at all to do with this job. I mean, if I'm a head coaching candidate, I should say, I want nothing to do with this job. If I'm Ben Johnson, stay the hell out of Chicago. I'd stay a year in Detroit again, even if you win the Super Bowl over going to Chicago. The Chicago Bears are not a good organization. I think they're a mess waiting to happen even more. I don't see them getting better. I see them maybe getting slightly better. Caleb Williams maybe is a little bit better his second year, but that's just a mess of an organization. And you can't take the stench out of how bad the Bears operated business this year. It was awful, in my opinion. So the Bears got everything they asked for as an organization, and it stinks for the city of Chicago and their fans, but that's just the way it is. All right, let's look at the NFC South. Pardon me. Let's look at the NFC South. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, wildly successful season, probably even more than last year. Only team in the NFC to beat both Philly and Detroit. They're the 3 seed. They did get swept by Atlanta, which is kind of weird, but having said that, Baker Mayfield's been playing lights out. I think he's definitely in the tier of very good quarterbacks in the NFL. I would not want to see the Buccaneers in a playoff game. I think it's going to be unfortunate for the Washington Commanders because I think the Bucs are going to beat them at home. I think the Commanders make it interesting, though. I think that's going to be one of the best football games we see this upcoming weekend. But the Buccaneers, to me, I think they actually are a dark horse Super Bowl candidate. I really think Baker Mayfield could take these Buccaneers and go to the Super Bowl. Offensively, they're terrific. They have Mike Evans, who just tied, or I might have beaten, I think it was tied Jerry Rice's record. So you have an all-time great wide receiver right off the rip. You have Chris Godwin when he's fully healthy. You look at their offensive line. They protect Baker very, very well. Their defense is pretty well coached, and I think Todd Bowles is an underrated head coach in the NFL. I think he's learned a lot more about clock management. I think he's managed the football game and has been a student of the game and has really been able to control things with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think Todd Bowles is an underrated head coach at this point. He's turned things around for Tampa despite Tom Brady not being there anymore. Baker Mayfield's been able to ride this ship. I think the Bucs are a fun watch. They've become one of the best organizations in the NFL. They've made the playoffs every single year since 2020, and they've won 4 straight division titles, from Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield. So, yeah, I'd watch out for the Bucs. I don't think they're going to go to the Super Bowl. I think Detroit and Philly are ultimately better than them. But having said that, though, Tampa Bay beat both of them this year. I wouldn't be surprised if they do it again. I don't think they will. And they did beat the Commanders. Out of the playoff field, I don't think they played the Rams. I don't think they played the Packers or the Vikings either. So, Tampa Bay, they could win this game, and I think they could be a team that no one expected to get to the Super Bowl. I don't think it will, but if I'm Tampa Bay, they're a fun watch. They are a really, really fun football team to watch, and this season was definitely a huge success for them. Even if they lose a playoff game, I think the season was successful for them, honestly. Baker Mayfield's really showing that he is one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL. I'm not going to put him in the great tier, but in the very good tier, he is up there. definitely, I think, the third best quarterback maybe in the NFC this season. And that's just based on the seeding alone. When you look at the Rams, they play the Vikings. I like them against them, but that's playoff seeding. We'll get back to the Rams in a second. Let's talk a little bit about the Falcons. Mess at the end of the year. I think Penix has some potential. I think Raheem Morris is a good head coach, but there's going to be a lot of work to do there. So I'd say their season was ultimately a failure. That's a talented roster, and they essentially blew away a chance to win the division. But they did sweep the Buccaneers, if that means anything. When you look at the New Orleans Saints, it was a mess. I think their offense was stellar at the beginning of the year. I really believed in them with Derek Carr. They're fun to watch at the beginning of the season. Kubiak looked like a great offensive mind, but fell completely apart. They were 2-7. They fired Dennis Allen. I think he was one of the problems the Saints had. Spencer Rattler is not their future. He looks like a mess, but he did play okay in that last game against the Bucs. So, to me, the Saints season was a failure. Hopefully they figure everything out. I like the Saints as an organization, but that was a mess this season. And then the Carolina Panthers. I mean, Bryce Young looked like a franchise quarterback towards the end of the year. Being patient, I think, is key with quarterbacks. Clearly, Carolina is. It looked like the wrong pick from last year. You could honestly make an argument that we've seen more from Bryce Young than C.J. Stroud these last few weeks. But that's just because Carolina's been a lot more competitive. I think he's clearly your quarterback going into next year. And I think Dave Canales deserves some credit as the Carolina Panthers head coach to getting this team to where they are now. I mean, they're not good still, and they have a lot of work to do. But they're starting to get more competitive. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're even slightly more competitive next year. Carolina's still a bad organization, though, so I'm not taking anything for granted. And I'm not so sure because of Bryce Young's size that I'm going to believe in him long term. But Dave Canales knows how to work with undersized QBs. He worked with Baker Mayfield last year. He worked with Bryce Young this year. We'll see what takes place there. But I would go as far as to say Carolina had a successful regular season. I really would. Even though it was a bad year in terms of the record, Carolina, I think, is a brighter future this year than they did last year. I don't think anyone thought Carolina would be in that position after this year. So, credit to the Carolina Panthers. I'm going to give them props right now. They came a long way from where they were, but there's still a lot of work to do. Back to the Rams now. The Rams play the Vikings. Overall, the regular season was a success. It kind of started off as a disaster, but they worked their way back. If the 49ers weren't so beat up, I think they might have challenged the Rams a little bit more. The Seahawks put up some fights, but the Seahawks played, as I keep joking, an Indiana Hoosier-style schedule. So when I look at the Rams, they were clearly the best team in this division. The Cardinals put up some fights, and the Cardinals destroyed the 49ers the last game of the season. I mean, it was kind of a pointless game, but yeah, I think you look at the Rams as a whole, they were the best team in this division, and they're right where they should be. And the Seahawks, Cardinals might have a bright future. I think Jonathan Gannon did a tremendous job as the coach this year. I think Kyler Murray proved he's just good enough to get the ball to some really good wide receivers. Marvin Harrison Jr. may take that big step next year, so we'll see what takes place there. Seahawks proved a lot to me. Geno Smith was really good. Now he has a double-digit win season. Seahawks, I think, have a good quarterback in place, but I still think there's a lot of work to do with Seattle. I don't really buy them yet. And then hands down for the 49ers, a mess of a season. A lot of injuries tailored into that. I still think Brock Purdy is going to be really good, but I think they're going to figure out a lot of things with the 49ers. I think their window might be slowly starting to close in terms of the Super Bowl, but we'll see. If the 49ers get healthy, they may have a shot. Those are my thoughts on all 32 NFL teams. As I said, college football, we'll talk about that on the next edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. A lot of big games coming up. Also, the Cleveland Cavaliers taking on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Could this be the game of the season in the NBA? Plenty more on the NBA and stuff on the next edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty, so make sure to stick around for that. Plenty to get to, because I'm Andrew Hoty. Those are my Raw Takes. Like and subscribe. Check out the show on social media. Have a good one, everybody.